ask ourselves a very fundamental question: could a species be energetically transformed? We're now zeroing in on the core question of how this interplanetary climate change that was predicted from these readings in the 1950s, which we'll see a bit later, could indeed lead to biological evolution of you and me on Earth, something that in fact might already be happening right now. We now look at the work of Dr. Tizian Kanchizin, a Chinese scientist whose work has been picked up and analyzed by Russian scientists. What he found was a DNA transformation that was through nothing more than a wave itself. As you see in this diagram, you have number 4 being a duck and number 6 being a chicken. Of course, they're not anatomically correct. It's a very simple diagram. But what you're looking at is that the duck, number 4, is inside a pentagonal room, a 5-sided room. All the number 2s that you see in this diagram represent funnels in which air can pass through and also energy can pass through. Then, after the funnels, you see those orange lines which actually represent copper pipes that go from the funnel to the other room where the pregnant chicken is being held. Now, the pregnant chicken is very important because there's eggs that are developing inside the chicken's womb. What you see with number 3 is a microwave generator. Now, this was not a lethal dose of microwaves. He didn't kill the duck, but he did excite the duck's DNA with microwave energy. Now, what happened was really phenomenal, because as the duck's DNA was being excited, those energy patterns went over into the room with the chicken. Now, let's look briefly at this image of a duck. You can see that the duck has a long beak, it has a long neck, it has large internal organs, and if you look down at the feet, you can clearly see that there's webbing between the toes. When we look at this picture of a chicken, you can see the chicken's beak is much shorter, you can see there's no webbing between the toes, and in fact the length of the neck is much shorter. Now, it was a synchronicity. It just so happened that I was looking for these pictures online, and when I found this picture of the chicken, it happened to be a chicken who was raising ducks. Now, of course, when the eggs hatched, they didn't look exactly like ducks, but what they did look like was really phenomenal. As you see in the next picture, there's webbing on the feet, and in fact they were called duck hens. The webbing grew on feet of eggs that were laid from a chicken. Chicken feet don't have webbing. Chicken feet are supposed to have naked toes. And as you look in this next image, you can clearly see that the head of the duck hen looks more like a duck than it does like a chicken. In fact, we have some very specific statistics we can look at here, in which 500 eggs were zapped through the chicken. Of those 500 chicken eggs that were zapped, 480 of them actually hatched. 80% of the eggs that hatched had a flat, duck-shaped head as they developed. 90% had a shift in the position of the eyes, where the eye actually moved back on the skull to the position it normally would be on the head of a duck. And 25% of them actually had webbing that grew between the toes. This is phenomenal, because what it shows is that the genetic material of the chicken was spontaneously rewritten inside the womb, so that when those eggs laid, they became half duck, half chicken creatures. That completely bypasses traditional Darwinian models of evolution. So you see how it is totally possible to explain evolution that has occurred on the Earth as being existing more primitive species that are energetically rewritten into more complex forms of life later on. Well, we can also look to the work of Dr. Peter Gariev, who took this even a step further. And what he did is to take eggs that had been laid by a frog and then zap them with a laser light that had gone through eggs laid from a salamander. Now, a salamander is considered a more primitive form of life than a frog. One of the unique qualities of a salamander is that you can cut off one of his limbs and the limb will actually regrow. The salamander has the power of regeneration, whereas the frog does not. So in this sense, you could almost say that it dialed the DNA backwards in evolution a bit. Because what happened when you redirect laser light through a salamander's embryos into a frog egg is that the frog egg has a complete metamorphosis, and what comes out is a fully healthy salamander, not a frog. Now this is a scientific revolution in the making, because it suggests that you can have a complete transformation from one species to another within one generation. Your parent could be one creature, you lay the egg develops into a completely different creature, and the only thing that you need to make that transition possible is the actual wave information that rewrites the DNA. It's almost as if DNA is like a jigsaw puzzle that has more than one solution. And this really changes how we see life and how we see evolution. It could very well be the engine of evolution.